She is too old for marriage. The 50-year-old spinster found love with a young warrior. They no longer said, "When will you get married?" Now they said, "It is too late." The words were not always spoken loudly, but she heard them everywhere, in quiet looks, polite smiles, and conversations that suddenly stopped when she entered the room. To the world around her, her life had already been decided. She was labeled, placed in a box, and forgotten. Her name did not matter much to others anymore. What mattered was her age. In her youth, she had been known as kind, hardworking, and full of promise. As the years passed, that promise slowly turned into pity in the eyes of people. She lived in a small town where traditions were strong and memories were long. Everyone knew everyone else, and everyone remembered who married young and who did not. She belonged to the second group. She had not chosen loneliness. Life had chosen a different path for her. When she was young, her family needed her. Her father became ill and her mother struggled to keep the household together. She stayed, helped, and sacrificed without complaint. Later, younger siblings needed support. She worked to pay for their education, their weddings, their futures. Each time someone suggested marriage for her, she replied, "Later." And later quietly turned into never. Now, at 50, she lived alone in a small but neat house. Every corner showed signs of care. The floors were clean, the windows always open to fresh air, and plants filled the space with life. She woke up early every morning, said a short prayer, and prepared a simple breakfast. Her routine never changed much, and that routine gave her comfort. It protected her from thinking too deeply. In public, she appeared calm and confident. She greeted neighbors with warmth, helped anyone who asked, and never showed bitterness. But when night arrived and the world grew quiet, her thoughts became louder. She would sit near the window, watching the moon rise, wondering how her life might have been if things had gone differently. She did not cry often, but sometimes her chest felt heavy, as if emotions had nowhere to go. The town respected her, but from a distance. They praised her sacrifices, yet used them as proof that her chance at love was gone. "She is strong," people said. "She doesn't need anyone." Those words sounded kind, but they slowly built walls around her. Strength in their eyes meant she should accept being alone. Family gatherings were the hardest. Her younger relatives arrived with their children, laughter filling the air. She smiled, asked about school, helped in the kitchen, and gave gifts. But no one asked about her heart. They assumed it was empty, or worse, that it no longer mattered. Sometimes someone would jokingly say, "Auntie, you enjoy freedom. Marriage is trouble." Everyone laughed, and she laughed too, even though the joke quietly hurt. She had learned to hide her feelings well. Years of responsibility had trained her to stay silent. When friends from her youth talked about their partners, she listened with interest, never jealousy. She believed that envy would only poison her peace. Instead, she told herself that every life had a different story, and hers simply did not include romance. Yet deep inside, she still believed in love. Not the loud, dramatic kind people talked about, but a gentle connection. Someone who would listen, understand, and sit beside her in silence without making her feel alone. She never spoke these thoughts aloud. They lived quietly in her heart, protected from disappointment. The town itself seemed to remind her daily of her position. Matchmakers passed by her house without stopping. Wedding invitations arrived for others, never for her. When new families moved in, she was introduced as the unmarried woman who takes care of everyone. That title followed her like a shadow. Still, she refused to become bitter. She continued her work in the community, helping where she could. Children trusted her, elders respected her, and strangers found comfort in her calm voice. She believed that kindness was a form of purpose. If love was not meant for her, then service would be enough, or so she told herself. Sometimes she remembered moments from her youth, a smile shared with someone who never returned, a proposal delayed until circumstances changed, a promise that life would slow down one day. Those memories were not painful anymore, just distant like old photographs. She had made peace with them. Or at least she thought she had. One evening, as she returned home from the market, she overheard two women talking behind her. They did not know she could hear them. "She is a good woman," one said. "But what can be done? She is too old for marriage," the other agreed. "Yes, that chapter is closed." But the word stayed with her long after she reached home. She placed her groceries down carefully, washed her hands, and sat quietly. For the first time in many years, she allowed herself to ask a dangerous question. Was it truly too late, or had she simply stopped believing? That night, sleep came slowly. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the town settling down. Dogs barking in the distance, a train horn far away, the wind brushing against the windows. Life was still moving, changing, and surprising people every day. Why, she wondered, should her story be finished while she was still breathing, still feeling? She pushed the thought away. Hope was risky. Hope made the heart vulnerable. At her age, disappointment felt heavier. So she chose caution over courage, as she always had. She closed her eyes and told herself that peace was enough. But somewhere deep inside her, a small part of her heart quietly disagreed. It did not speak loudly. It did not demand anything. It simply waited, unseen, unheard, but alive. She did not know it yet, but her quiet life was standing at the edge of change. The world believed her story was already written. She believed it too. But life, as it often does, was preparing to prove everyone wrong. Change did not arrive loudly in her life. It came quietly, without warning, like a soft knock on a door she had stopped opening long ago. It began on an ordinary morning when the town prepared for a small community gathering. People were asked to help with arrangements, and as always, she offered her time without hesitation. That was the day she noticed him for the first time. He stood at the edge of the open ground, speaking with the town elders. He was tall, strong, and carried himself with discipline. His posture showed confidence, but his eyes held calm seriousness rather than pride. He was known as a warrior, a protector trained to serve and defend. Though he was young, he had already faced situations that forced him to grow up faster than most. She did not pay much attention at first. Young men passed through the town often, usually loud and full of energy. But there was something different about him. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, his words were thoughtful and respectful. He did not try to impress anyone. Later that day, she was asked to help organize supplies. As she carried a basket toward the storage area, she felt the weight shift suddenly. Before she could react, someone gently took one side of the basket. "Please, let me help," a calm voice said. She looked up and saw him standing there. His expression was polite, almost shy. She nodded and thanked him. Together they walked a short distance without speaking. The silence was not uncomfortable. It felt natural. At the storage area, he placed the basket down carefully. "You do a lot for the town," he said simply. She was surprised. People rarely noticed her efforts so directly. "It is nothing," she replied. "I just do what I can." Their conversations were short at first, simple greetings, small talk about the weather or daily tasks. But gradually, those brief exchanges grew longer. He asked her about her life, her work, and her thoughts, not in a questioning way, but with genuine interest. She found herself answering honestly, something she had not done in a long time. With others, she usually gave safe answers. With him, she spoke freely without realizing it. He never mentioned her age. He never looked at her with curiosity or judgment. To him, she was simply a woman with experience and calm strength. That alone made her feel different inside. She learned pieces of his story as well. He had left home at a young age for training. Discipline shaped his days and duty guided his choices. He had seen loss and struggle, and though he did not speak of it often, she sensed the weight he carried. Behind his strength was quiet tiredness, the kind that came from responsibility. One evening, as they sat near a small fire with others around, she noticed how he listened when elders spoke. He did not interrupt or act impatient. When he laughed, it was soft and real. She realized she enjoyed being near him, not because of attraction, but because of peace. That realization scared her. She reminded herself of reality. She was 50. He was young. The world would never accept such a connection. She told herself to keep distance, to stay within safe boundaries, but life had already started to blur those lines. One afternoon he found her sitting alone repairing a small basket. He asked if he could sit nearby. She agreed. For a while they worked in silence. "You seem very calm," he said after some time, "even when things are difficult. But what if some things can still change?" Whispers followed. She sensed it immediately. She had lived long enough to recognize judgment without hearing words. She started avoiding him. She changed her routine, arrived early to events and left before he could approach. He noticed the distance but did not force conversation. Instead, one day he gently asked, "Did I do something wrong?" "It is just better this way." It reminded her that she was still alive, still capable of feeling warmth, still human. The next time they met, she decided to be honest but careful. "People talk," she said calmly. "It is not good for you to be seen with me. That is not something to be ashamed of." She knew society would not be kind. She knew expectations were rigid. She told herself this connection was temporary, something that would fade. But life was quietly moving forward. The young warrior did not see her as someone left behind by time. He saw strength, patience, and depth. And she, despite all her caution, began to see something she had forgotten how to imagine, a future that was not yet closed. Neither of them knew where this path would lead, but something had already changed. A door she thought was locked had opened just enough to let light in. And once light enters, darkness never feels the same again. The change that had quietly entered her life now began to draw attention. What once felt private and gentle slowly became visible to others, and with visibility came judgment. The town that had always watched her from a distance now watched closely. It started with looks that lasted a second too long. Conversations stopped when she walked by. Smiles became tight and polite instead of warm. She felt it everywhere, in the market, at gatherings, even in familiar streets she had walked all her life. People were not cruel openly, but their silence carried meaning. She tried to ignore it. She reminded herself that she had lived under opinions her entire life. This should not be new. But this time, the weight felt heavier because something important was at risk. It was no longer just her own feelings she had to protect. The young warrior felt the change too. Friends warned him quietly. Elders gave him long looks and careful advice. "Focus on your duty," they said. "Do not invite unnecessary talk." Some spoke kindly, others less so. They reminded him of expectations, of future paths already planned for him. He listened, but his heart felt unsettled. One evening they met by chance near the edge of town, where the noise faded and the air felt lighter. Neither of them spoke at first. The silence between them was filled with thoughts they did not know how to express. "You should not be seen with me," she said finally, her voice calm but firm. "It is not fair to you." "You did not choose this attention," he replied. "Why should you carry the blame?" She had learned when to step back, when to let go, and when to accept limits. That night she decided to create distance again, not because she wanted to, but because she believed it was the right thing to do. She reduced their conversations, avoided places where he might be, and kept herself busy. She told herself she was protecting him. Inside, her heart argued. It asked why her happiness always came last, why sacrifice was expected from her without question, but she pushed those thoughts aside. Responsibility had always guided her choices. The young warrior noticed her withdrawal. He respected her silence, but it left him restless. He began questioning himself for the first time in a long while. He wondered if he was being selfish. He wondered if his presence had caused her pain. He thought about the calm he felt around her, the clarity of her words, the way she listened without judgment. No one else made him feel that way, not because of comfort alone, but because she understood him without trying to change him. Pressure increased from all sides. Some told him he was wasting time. Others said he was inviting trouble. A few laughed and dismissed the situation as impossible. "It will pass," they said. "She will understand." "This cannot continue," she said before he could speak. "It is better to end things before they become difficult." Then he spoke again, slower this time. "What do you want?" That night she sat alone in her home, surrounded by familiar walls. For the first time, those walls felt narrow. She realized how much space she had given to others' opinions and how little to her own heart. Memories returned, of sacrifices made without complaint, of choices shaped by duty, of dreams delayed and forgotten. She wondered if this was another sacrifice she was expected to make simply because of her age. Fear held her tightly, fear of being judged, fear of being blamed, fear of being disappointed again. She had survived loneliness. She was not sure she could survive hope being taken away. The next day, whispers turned into open comments. Someone joked loudly about impossible matches. Another questioned her sense quietly but firmly. Each word chipped away at her strength. She smiled as she always did, but inside something began to crack. The young warrior faced his own struggle. He was asked to focus on training to prepare for future responsibilities. Do not let emotions distract you, he was told. He respected discipline. He believed in duty, but he also believed in truth. He realized that turning away from what mattered would cost him more than facing judgment. One evening he stood outside her home, uncertain. He did not want to pressure her, but he could not stay silent anymore. When she opened the door and saw him, surprise crossed her face. "I am not here to make things harder," he said. "I just want to be honest. But do not do it because others tell you to." For the first time in many years, she allowed herself to feel angry, not at him, but at the rules that had controlled her life. Rules that told her when to hope and when to stop. Rules that decided her worth based on age. "I am afraid," she admitted quietly. "So am I," he said, "but fear should not decide everything." It did not erase judgment or remove obstacles, but it changed something inside her. She realized she was tired of choosing silence over truth. The days that followed were tense. She moved through the town aware of every look, every word, but something inside her had shifted. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled her completely. She began to understand that dignity did not come from obedience to expectations. It came from honesty with oneself. The path ahead was uncertain. Society had already chosen its opinion, but for the first time she was beginning to question whether she needed its approval, and that question, once asked, refused to disappear. The town did not change overnight. People still talked. Opinions did not soften just because two hearts were struggling quietly. But something important had already changed inside her, and once that happened, the world no longer felt as powerful as it once did. She woke up one morning and realized she was tired of living only to meet expectations. For years, she had carried responsibility like a badge of honor. She had accepted silence as strength. She had believed that denying herself was the same as being good. Now, for the first time, she questioned that belief. She went about her day as usual, but with a new awareness. The same streets, the same faces, the same routines, but her steps felt different, lighter, yet unsure. She noticed how often she had lowered her eyes in the past, how often she had made herself small to make others comfortable. That afternoon, she met the young warrior again. This time, there was no tension in her voice, no distance in her posture. They sat across from each other, not as people defending their choices, but as two human beings searching for truth. "I cannot promise an easy path," she said honestly. "People will not accept this quickly. Maybe they never will." "I have spent my life thinking my story was over," she said quietly, "that I had already missed my chance." They continued to meet openly, calmly, without hiding and without making noise. Their connection remained dignified and respectful, rooted in understanding rather than excitement. At first, the town reacted strongly. Some shook their heads. Some spoke openly against it. A few avoided her altogether. She felt the sting, but it did not break her. She reminded herself that she had survived worse, years of loneliness, years of being unseen. What surprised her most was that not everyone disapproved. One older woman stopped her one day and said softly, "I did not have the courage you have. I hope you find peace." The words were brief, but they carried weight. Another person said nothing but smiled in a way that felt genuine. Slowly the noise began to fade. People grew tired of talking. New topics replaced old ones. Life moved on as it always does. The world did not end because one woman refused to stay in the box given to her. The young warrior faced challenges too. He was questioned, tested, reminded of duty, but he remained steady. He did not argue loudly or act against anyone. He simply lived his truth with calm confidence. That quiet strength earned him respect, even from those who disagreed. What mattered most was what grew between them. They talked often, not about the future and big promises, but about life, values, fears, and hopes. She shared stories she had never spoken aloud. He shared burdens he had carried alone. They learned each other slowly, carefully, without rushing. For her, love did not feel like fireworks. It felt like warmth, like being understood without explanation, like sitting beside someone and not feeling alone. She realized that love was not something she had missed. It was something she had arrived at later with wisdom and patience. One evening, as they walked quietly near her home, she stopped and looked at the sky. "Do you ever regret choosing this path?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "No," he said, "because regret comes from living someone else's life." She no longer apologized for existing. Her kindness remained, but it was no longer a sacrifice, it was a choice. People who once saw her only as the unmarried woman began to see her as something else, a person who chose courage late in life but fully. She did not claim victory. She did not demand approval. She simply lived honestly. One day, while sitting alone in her home, she thought back to the woman she had been years ago, the one who believed peace meant silence, who thought strength meant giving up. She felt compassion for that version of herself. She had done the best she could with what she knew. Now she knew more. She knew that dignity did not mean denying the heart. She knew that age did not erase worth. She knew that love did not belong only to the young or the lucky. Most of all, she knew that it was never too late to choose truth. The town would remember her story in many ways. Some would call it unusual, some would call it wrong, but a few would quietly call it brave. As for her, she no longer needed labels. She had learned that life does not ask permission before offering change. It simply waits for us to accept it, and she had finally said yes.